Hi everyone, my name is Maya and I am the founder of Revolution Dressed. It is a clothing apparel brand where I translate my artwork into wearable pieces of art that you can purchase. I started making art when I was a little girl. I like to think that my grandmother was my first art teacher. So she taught me how to sew and knit and embroider and really work with materials. And I remember, I feel like one of my first art project memories was we decided to turn my bunk bed into a little fort. So we gathered up all this fabric from around the house and we created this sort of sheet that you could tie up that had like a little windows and a little door. So I like to think that it was my first installation art piece was this thing that I made with my grandmother. My art is inspired by my history, my identity, primarily my heritage as an Indo-Caribbean person. So our ancestors come from India, some are from China, some were enslaved West Africans that were brought over to work on sugarcane plantations by the British. So that's how my ancestors sort of came to be in the Americas, and then later with my mother's generation immigrating to America. So there are these multiple movements and migrations and fractures that create these really complex relationships to this really global transnational history. So one of the main ways that I work is collage and assemblage. So collage is 2D and assemblage is 3-dimensional. And I collect a lot of different materials and sort of bring them into conversation with one another. And through that, I'm bringing a lot of these different histories together in conversation with one another. So in a series, I might look at sort of the history of Western art, which is sort of the dominant narrative in the United States, and the history of what we think of as Eastern art. And these are often set up as being in opposition to one another, but historically that's not really accurate. There was a lot of trade and cultural exchange between East and West. And so there are actually more connections than we often realize. My work does have this spiritual element, and a lot of art in Western art has this in it, but I've noticed, and I think this is changing, that the art world is really uncomfortable with talking explicitly about the spiritual element. So, there's so many artists who are made tarot decks or used tarot or used sort of spiritual ideas in their work. My work, because it's steeped in Eastern, South Asian iconography, that is religious, spiritual iconography. But for me, it's about how do these things become manifest in the present, because a lot of that iconography, it's speaking to people's lives from hundreds or thousands of years ago, but I want to speak to people's lives today. So I incorporate that imagery, I incorporate ideas from tarot, because I am both Eastern and Western. I went to Catholic school, from 1st to 4th grade, and then my mom picked me up and moved me to Iowa, and I became part of this transcendental meditation community. So I went to school and I learned Sanskrit and I meditated twice a day and I did yoga. So my identity and my life experience are a mix of these different things. And growing up in my house, even aesthetically, my mom had Impressionist paintings on the wall, and she had South Asian folk art on the wall. She had West African folk art that she'd collected. So I grew up where all of these things coexisted together. And so it's a reflection of me and my experience. And hopefully, you connect with that too. I started Revolution Dressed really from a place of wanting my art to move beyond the traditional gallery space. So I have been working as an artist for, more than 15 years at this point, and always sort of making these pieces that would go into a show and maybe some people would go see it. And I really wanted something more than that. And a couple different things happened. Definitely the pandemic made me reassess my relationship to my practice. But I think a really big thing that happened for me was the birth of my son. So I went through this incredibly intense experience, and I thought, if I can do this, like literally nothing else should intimidate me. So, I had this moment of, what are my priorities in my practice? And I realized that that the most important thing for me was that my art lives in the world and that people see it. So I got really excited about this idea of putting my art onto clothing, which would then go onto people's bodies and move through the world. And so that you would become the art gallery. I want people to take away from Revolution Dressed, I think, a sense of hope. So I do deal with these really difficult histories that I think sometimes can be painful or uncomfortable. But I want people to believe that by acknowledging and celebrating these shared histories, that we're richer, by not covering it up and by embracing abundance. That the future is not this place of austerity and lack, that the future has to be a place of abundance for everyone. That's really the only way we will survive as a species. And so my work is sort of infused with that belief. And so I feel like that's the feeling that I want people to take with them from Revolution Dressed.